Hello, and welcome to episode 35 of Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. Today is Sunday, December 6, 2020, and I am Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, and I'm here with my dad, Dan, through Zoom. Hey, Dad.
You like me to put my glasses on, so
That's fine.
here they are.
Yes, and we made it to 35 episodes.
I
That's hard
can't
to
believe it.
believe. I know. That's good. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And my dad is going to talk about uh, the Spanish and how they relate to Mecklenburg County and also the Columbian exchange. Is that right, Dad? Is that what you said?
Well, I tell you, we have we only have one physical reminder of Spanish contact, really not contact, but Spanish history
Influence?
and influence as far as Mecklenburg County is concerned. But that's not to say that the Spanish didn't have a very important role, not only in the New World, but also came through this part of North Carolina. And the oldest European settlement in North Carolina is not the Lost Colony.
Hmm.
The oldest English
Really?
settlement in North Carolina is Fort San Juan, which is in Morganton, North Carolina, or very close to Morganton, North Carolina. So that's going to be the big story, is European influence, the contact that European culture had with Native American culture, how they were different, how they were the same, focusing especially upon the first Europeans who came to what is now the United States of America. It wasn't the Dutch, it wasn't the French, it wasn't the English, it wasn't the Germans, it was indeed the Spanish. So that's what I'm going to be talking about.
Okay, well, take it away.
Well, you know, when we talk about the contact of different cultures, when somebody who is entirely different in terms of their belief about the afterlife and their belief about cosmology, which is the nature of the world, their concept of gods, when people of varying cultures, very direct, different cultures, come together, that, to say the least, is a dramatic impact. And one of the things I think we think about, and in fact, you'll see a lot of science fiction about this, you know, close encounters and all that kind of stuff, people from Mars or wherever. You know, one of the big questions that we continually ask ourselves in this incredibly bewildering thing called the universe, are we alone? And will indeed someday we have to encounter somebody, some living creature who has enough intelligence for self-awareness that comes from a different place? You know, people talk about flying saucers and all this kind of business. And so I thought that would be sort of a good analogy to start out with very briefly. And you know, of course, that thing that we call the sun is just a star. And quite frankly, it's not a particularly spectacular star in terms of its size and its brightness. Now, this, of course, star is the center of our solar system. And you can see here, if I've got depicted up here, you've got the planets that circumnavigate this star. Not all stars have planets, but there's some really unique things, and we do not know how unique, about the Earth. And I would say there are three things. One of which is it has a circular orbit. Now, many planets, and we've found about 70, and we're really beginning to find a lot, have elliptical orbits. And if they have an elliptical orbit, they come too close to the sun and it gets too hot. So the Earth has a circular orbit. The second thing is we are far enough from our gaseous giant planets. And our two great gaseous planets are Jupiter and Saturn. If we were closer to Jupiter, we would literally be destroyed by Jupiter's immense size, and it would literally destroy the Earth. And the third thing that's so important about the Earth is how far it is from the sun. You know, the two that are closer, Mercury and Venus, are too warm. The next one going out is Mars, which is too cold. But the Earth is in what's called the Goldilocks zone. And you know, there's all this talk about global warming and how much carbon we're putting into the atmosphere. And, you know, President-elect Biden saying that he's really going to get big on this Green New Deal. Well, listen, let me tell you, folks, you know, every human being that's ever lived has lived on that planet as far as we know. And so there are, by the way, what's the name of our galaxy, Mary Dana?
The Milky Way.
The Milky. We don't know how many stars there are in the Milky Way. They're all estimates, at least 1 billion. It might be as high as 4 billion. Now, not all of these stars have planets, but we figure, I'm no expert in this field. All I do is communicate.
Yeah, I was
what
surprised
I read.
you knew so much about all this.
Well, there are about as many planets we think as there are stars. Some stars don't have planets. And as I have said, they have developed sufficient technology, astronomers, that they're really beginning with these radar telescopes they have now. They're really beginning to give awareness of more and more planets all the time. And of course, what everybody's looking for is a rock planet far enough away from the gaseous giants in a circular orbit around the star that it's part of, solar system, that's in the Goldilocks zone. That's what they're looking for. And can you imagine what it's going to do? Now, when we talk about the observable universe, as I read it and I study, they think that now remember, they're between 1 and 4 billion stars in the Milky Way. Now, obviously, the Milky Way is not the only galaxy. In fact, if you get in low sunlight, you can see Andromeda, which is the next closest galaxy to ours. It'll take you about 20,000 years to get there. Don't worry about taking off on a trip next week. But they figure that in the observable universe, there are about 2 trillion galaxies. So to say the least, you've got a big sample. Well, can you imagine what would happen? You know, here's the Milky Way. Of course, the Milky Way is a big spiral. We're in that Milky Way.
Mm-hmm.
You can see they depict, and you can actually see Andromeda at night if you have real good low. You don't get worried about all the stuff that pollutes, light pollution we have.
Okay.
Now, let's start talking about cultures.
There's that doll that you showed
There's
last
that
week.
wonderful little Indian doll that my mother-in-law acquired on her honeymoon. Now, there's something very, very interesting about this doll because clearly the person who made this doll understood that there are different cultures, and that they understood Native American culture. And it has to do with her eyes. You notice that she's not looking at you. She's looking away. Now, that's a clear indication of the fact that this person understood Indian culture. Now, when I say Indian culture, clearly they varied. They were not by all means the same. And as far as the number of Native Americans, and we talked about this last week, our best estimate as far as the current United States, there were somewhere between 4 and 6 million people living in what's now the United States when the quote Europeans arrived. It was considered very, it's interesting. Every human being has 9 holes in their body. 7 of them are in their head. Females have 11, but everybody has 9. And the most dramatic body opening that we look at, really right into the innards of the body, is the eye. And they thought it was disrespectful. It was rude to look somebody straight in the eye. Because the idea was that you were actually trying to take their soul. You were trying to grab them and pull them away and pull them into your body. So it customarily, you looked away from people. You didn't look at people. Now, we, of course, are taught to look people in the eye, but they were not taught to look at people in the eye. Now, what this says, people say, well, human beings are the same everywhere. Of course, all human beings have 7 holes in their heads. They all, of course, have a brain of self-awareness. They all have foreknowledge of death. They're all mortal. Well, of course, obviously, all human beings can, reproduce. Male and female, we're of course dioecious, not monoecious. We can create new human beings, but all human beings are not the same because they have different cultures. They have different belief systems that they become very, very wedded to. Now, when we talk about Native American culture, and I don't even claim to be an expert in all this stuff, except I've done some reading, and when I'm talking, and they varied, but I'm going to be talking about the Mississippian culture. Now, you might remember that that was the culture that produced the Town Creek Indian Man. That was this culture, rough, and you'll get different dates. But there's no question that when Hernando de Soto, who was the first Spaniard really to penetrate the southeastern United States, and he did that in the 1530s. He actually began 1539, and I'm going to be talking about that more in a minute. He encountered the Mississippian culture. That's the culture that it was in decline, but it was still there. Now, let's talk a little bit about cosmology. Let's talk a little bit about Indian religion, because religion is all based on belief. There's a very practical side to North American religious beliefs and customs, because they took their belief system from what they observed, what they saw. They knew, for example, that the sun, that star, was absolutely fundamental to growing their crops. Now, the Mississippians really depended on 3 primary crops, although they grew many more, but it was beans, squash, and corn, the so-called 3 sisters agriculture. Well, they knew that if the sun didn't come out, that those crops were not going to grow. They also were very aware of the fact that the length of the day really had a lot to do with how warm or how cold it was. And they were very aware of the fact of the winter solstice, for example, which, by the way, just for the record, we are approaching. The winter solstice is December 21st, December 22nd, according to our calendar. And I think many of you know the reason you celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December was because there was already a Roman holiday that celebrated the fact that the days were getting longer. They had to pick something, so they picked December 25th for Jesus to be born. But I'm not trying to offend anybody.
Hey,
But
okay.
I'm just saying that the sun was very important. You can see this dude. He's looking at the sun, and the very much associated with the sun was fire. You know, I talked before about the fact that at Town Creek Indian Mounds, they had these ceremonial fires.
Mm-hmm.
So their sense of the afterworld, the world of, you know, the sun and fire was very important in their cosmology, to represent the higher power, the higher force above us. They were also very interested in birds. You'll see in their pottery, you'll see in their tattoos. And by the way, the Native Americans did have a lot of tattoos. You will see a lot of birds, particularly the hawk. They were particularly fascinated with the hawk because it flies above the earth. It's above. So you see, they're also, they were very much into the, you know, about Stonehenge, which
Mm-hmm.
of course is an age. Well, the Mississippians had structures that were very similar to mark different positions of the sun during the year. Summer solstice, winter solstice, spring equinox, fall equinox. The movement of the sun was very, very much. They were also fascinated with constellations in the sky. You know, for example, I don't think I showed it last week, but these mounds that they built, these very elaborate mounds, which we don't have in North Carolina, one of their favorite symbols was a snake. Well, that was a constellation that they saw in the sky. So they were very much into the night sky and into the heavens. You know, many people remark that so many of the great religions, like Christianity and like Judaism, came out of the Middle East because the air was dry, there was no light pollution, and they could see the sky, and it really sort of inspired them to see. So that now, another thing that cosmology is very much into is, where do we come from? You know, where do we come from, and where are we going to go when we die? Well, understand these people, the Mississippians, and this was not true of just any of the people, the Native Americans. They were an agricultural people. You know, that by the time that the Europeans came, these folks were big time practicing agriculture. I told you, you know, corn, squash, and beans, right? I mean, there were a lot of that going on. Well, plants come up out of the ground, right?
Right.
And when plants die, they go back into the ground. Well, that's exactly what they thought. The idea of the earth was that the earth was your mother. That's one reason they had so much respect for the earth. That's why they had great. I mean, I'm not saying these were angels, Lord, they were involved in warfare and killed each other like human beings always do. But their concept of the earth was as a mother, because that's where the plants came out of. And so the idea was that essentially we come up and we go down. And of course, that's why, of course, they would burn the bodies, and some burned, some didn't. But the body was buried in the earth. It went back to the earth, just like the plant does. Now, I'm not saying these people are right. I'm not saying these people are wrong. When you look at the world anthropologically, you have to understand that all human beings faced the same fundamental question: what is going on? And they try to answer these questions by developing these cultural norms. That's what they do. Now, I wanted to show you this. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I remember years ago with my dear mother and father, this would have been so many years ago, I don't even want to remember. It would have been in the 1950s.
60 years ago.
Yeah, we went to the first European permanent settlement in what is now the United States. And of course, as you know, that was not Jamestown. That was not Plymouth Rock. Jamestown was 1607. The Pilgrims came ashore on the Mayflower in 1620. The first permanent European settlement in what is now the United States was established in 1565. So, that's a whole generation before any English-speaking people came here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it was St. Augustine, Florida. And it was Spanish. And the first capital of what they call New Spain or Florida was at what's now Paris Island. It was St. Helena at Paris Island, which was established in 1566. And I remember taking this boat ride, and I thought to myself, the cross obviously is a symbol of Christianity. And the Spanish, even though their primary desire and primary reason for coming to the New World was greed, there's no doubt about that. They were after wealth. They also had this symbol of they were coming because of doing missionary work. That as Roman Catholics, they were good Roman Catholics, devout Roman Catholics, they were bringing Christianity, the quote, true religion, to these native people. Now, one of the things that symbolizes that is this statue and huge cross, which I saw from a boat at St. Augustine, Florida. Well, now I'm not speaking for or against what the Spanish were doing. That's not my purpose. But I'm saying, how would you feel if you have been basically worshiping the sun, having ceremonial fires, if you basically view the world in a very different whole cosmology, and somebody comes in and says, well, you folks just all wrong. We're doing this for your good. Well, you can imagine that creates tension. But that's truly what happened. What happens with the Spanish coming is it's a little bit difficult to deal with, a little bit hard to deal with. Now, I did want to just briefly, we had a whole podcast earlier about the voyages of exploration.
And by the way, you've been talking like 25 minutes.
Well, you know, I don't care. I'm
I'm
not
just
making
telling
any.
you.
Well, do you think it's interesting?
I do. You always tell me to let you know how long you've
Yeah,
been
yeah, yeah,
talking.
yeah.
So I'm letting
Well,
you know.
I don't care. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. In
Okay.
fact, this might cause me just to show something that I wasn't going to show because, well, I will show. Let me show you. You know, you talk about lasting
Well, I thought you
consequences.
were going to go talk about the Spanish, the
No,
exploration thing.
I am. But if I can get this doggone thing's driving me crazy. This mouse is driving. Well, let me see if it'll work this way.
Oh, we got a video.
Can you see the video?
Yeah.
Now that's Shackelford Banks. Shackelford Banks is part of the Cape Lookout National Seashore Park. Those are wild horses that are on the North Carolina Outer Banks. Now you'll notice that this horse has got a real shaggy kind of mane to it. These are colonial Spanish Mustangs. Now, I'm not going to go over again. Well, a little bit. I'll go over it. You remember that what really caused this voyage of exploration was that the Spanish wanted to find a shorter way to get to China because of the Silk Road. And you remember things that caused it were basically the printing press, which meant that they got able to share information. The Renaissance sort of encouraged people to start thinking about what humanity could do on its own. Therefore, they figured out how to do latitude. Columbus set sail on August 3rd, August 3rd, 1492.
I don't know. Okay.
He set sail, and it took him until October 7th to get to the New World. That's how long it took. They didn't know where they were. They first, eventually, of course, the Spanish concentrated on the Caribbean and on South America because they found out the word got back there was a heck of a lot of gold back there. Okay. But by the early 1500s, Spanish, primarily for purposes of mapping, the Spanish came up the east coast of what's the United States. And they came up the Carolina coast. Now, many of you know that the area around Cape Lookout, Cape Hatteras, is known as the graveyard of the Atlantic because that's where the Gulf Stream turns to the northeast. And there are really a lot of crazy currents that occur in there. And also, there's a lot of shallow water. And some of these, as far as we know, some of these Spanish explorers who were just moving up the coast, observing, not coming ashore, would sometimes get in trouble in storms. And of course, if you get in a storm, the first thing you want to do is to make your boat a little bit lighter so it'll right. So they'd force some of the horses to jump off the ship. And some of those horses were able to make it ashore. And so when somebody thinks about, well, what kind of impact did the Spanish have and what have they left in North Carolina? It's these horses. Now, I'm not saying that there hasn't also been some breeding with some local horses. There certainly has been. But there's no question about the fact that these horses do have a direct line back to these early 16th century. We're talking about the early 1500s explorers that moved into this region. So that's cool. What do you think about that?
I think it's cool.
Did you know that?
I did know that. Yes,
You did.
I
Oh,
did.
my back. What am I doing?
Yeah. Are you sharing the screen?
Screen sharing is stopped. I'm gonna go back and try to do
You're
what I
having
can
technical
do.
difficulties.
No, it's not technical difficulties. I'll get there. Okay, we're back, right?
Yeah.
Am I back? Well, so, but you know, what do you think about, what do you, me and Dana, what is, I don't like, you don't like me to put you
I
on the
hate it
spot,
when you put
do
me
you?
on the spot.
Huh?
What?
You don't like me to put you on the spot.
No, what were you gonna ask?
Well, how do you feel about missionary work?
How do I feel about missionary work?
Yes. In other words, if you,
I've never really thought
if,
about it, how I feel about it.
well, let me ask it another way. How disturbing do you think it would be to people's sense of life if all of a sudden someone came and said, look, what you have believed, what you have been taught, the things that you're up to, just you just don't know it, but they're all wrong. What kind of an impact do you think that would have?
Well, I don't think they would take too kindly to that.
Do you think it would be disturbing?
Absolutely.
All right, let me talk about this guy right here. See him? See the man?
Yes,
See him right there?
I see him.
That is Hernando de Soto. Now, the first European, see, Hernando de Soto was a conquistador, which meant that he was basically a Spanish military officer. The same year that Columbus sailed from Spain to the New World, quote, quote, New World, the Spanish achieved a great military victory at the Battle of Granada. They had been trying to get rid of the Moors, the Muslims, who had come from North Africa and had taken control of Spain, southern Spain. They'd been trying to get rid of them for 700 years. And they finally succeeded in 1492. Well, what that meant was that Spain had developed some really significant military tools and armor and swords and muskets and cannons to defeat the Moors. Now, Hernando de Soto was, we don't know exactly when he was born. He was born about 1500, some say 1496. Born in Spain, he didn't have anything to do with the Moors, but there continued to be a very strong military presence among the Spanish. Hernando de Soto, Desoto, 2 words. Hernando de Soto was born very poor. When he died of fever on the Mississippi River, or close to the Mississippi River, in what's now in Louisiana, he was one of the richest men in the world because he participated in the conquest of the Incas of Peru. And he had so much gold. Man, Mary Diana, if you put this in your booth at the Sleepy Poet, you'd go crazy. I mean, he had so much gold, it was unbelievable. And De Soto, by the way, could have just lived a rich life in Spain, but he was a person of adventure. So the Spanish sent him back to the New World about 1537 and made him the head of Cuba. He was like the governor of Cuba, which of course was part of the Spanish Empire. And the Spanish king, who by that time Ferdinand and Isabella were dead, Charles V was the king of Spain. He told De Soto, you found all that gold down in Peru. There's got to be some of that stuff up there in the North American, area too. You need to go up there in Florida and find out what the heck is up there. So he was authorized to mount a major expedition, a major expedition. And that's what he did. Now, this is really, he landed, and this is a depiction of him landing. And I'll show you the map in a minute. They've got a big memorial down there to him for this. He landed at Tampa Bay. Okay, it's just a drawing of him landing, and you can see there they are. Now they have several things with them. One of which is depicted here, which you have, and one of them which is not depicted, which I'll talk about in a minute. Notice they got horses. He had there were about 600 men on this expedition. Remember, this is before any railroads, way before any railroads.
Right.
The logistical difficulties of mounting this expedition were incredible. These were the first horses that had ever set foot on North America. So if you want to know the impact of the Spanish, it's not only those horses on the Outer Bank, it's all the horses. Now, I'm not saying other Europeans didn't bring horses, but they're the first one to bring horses. You know, a lot of people believe, what do you think of, I talked about those John Wayne Westerns I went to.
Yes.
All those Native Americans were on horses. Well, they got them all from the Spanish, I'll tell you that. So that's what he brought. Now here, and I'm going to show you something else in a minute. Here is the route that he went on. Now, you notice he started here in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a multi-year expedition, the De Soto expedition. They came up through what's now Florida, came up through Georgia, South Carolina, came up into Western North Carolina. I'll talk about that in a minute. Went across the mountains, went over into, what is now Alabama and Mississippi. They were the first Europeans to see the Mississippi River. And he died over here in Louisiana. He caught a fever in 1543 and he died. And about 300 men survived and went down the Mississippi River and went back down to the Gulf of Mexico. So it was a prodigious expedition. Now, there's a lot of question in scholarship about what route he went. But the current thinking is that he came right up the Catawba River. We know he came up a river because, even if he wasn't on the water, the land's flat, more or less, along a river, and water's available. They got to have water for them blooming horses. And so the belief is they came up right, where you used to live in Belmont, right?
Mm-hmm.
The river was right there, wasn't it?
Yes.
Well, that's where De Soto came up.
Right through there.
Now this would have been in 1540.
Right. So that's the border of Gaston County and Mecklenburg County.
That's exactly right. Now, De Soto's purpose was basically to find a land route that would take them to Mexico. They had already basically, how are we doing on time?
Well, you've been talking about 40 minutes.
Well, I got to finish the last thing, but I'll come. Another thing that he was very important for, he brought 13 pigs. Believe me, pigs breed. So pigs are another big thing that the Spanish brought. They are not indeed part of America. I will continue with this next time. Okay. I have barely scratched the surface. Anybody who thinks the Spanish have not had an impact can only go down to the Outer Banks and see the horses. And also what you can do if you want to is eat you some barbecue, right? Go eat you some barbecue because, and by the way, I had a lot to do with pigs and I'll talk about pigs next time. That's a nice pig farm in North Carolina. Lord God, what we've got to do with pigs. I enjoyed it. I hope it was useful, and we will go on next time.
Thank you. Yes, I know. And we'll talk about all your pig research next time, right? Okay.
Some of it, yeah.
Some of it.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so thanks everybody for being with us today. Thanks, Dad, and for all that information. It's been interesting.
Yeah.
And we will look
Yeah.
forward
Remember
to
them
seeing you
pigs? Remember them pigs
right,
to
and
go eat
have some
that barbecue?
barbecue. Okay, and we
Without
will
De
see
Soto, he brought us pigs. No
pigs.
bacon. Without De Soto, no sausage.
Okay, all right. So we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.